this session, we've got two speakers and then a little bit of time for interaction and discussion. So the session is about creating a sustainable city. That's economically, socially, and environmentally. So we're starting with Philipp Rode, who's going to talk to us about the work he's been doing at LSE around cities. And the mission there is, how can you get cities to interact, and how can you get the design of cities to focus on these three things: society, culture, and environment? So straight up, Philipp, thank you.
Very much. Is the microphone working? Yes, wonderful. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to people who do things in cities rather than that think about cities and to do research about it. What I'm going to speak about is one small piece of research we have been conducting over the last year about sustainable cities, and more specifically related to the green economy and how this economy is built through city governments around the world. The context is an obvious one. It's the same context as the one of this conference. A pattern of global urbanization, a pattern where cities, however you want to describe these urbanization patterns, certainly gain prominence, and they become increasingly important for an equation related to solutions, but also related to problems we are facing across the board. Now, the very short presentation I'm giving you today is focusing on a comparative or on a survey of city governments around the world, and included a few case study cities as well. In total, we approached about 90 cities globally. It's a pretty good spread here around the world. Inquiring, it was an official inquiry assisted by ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and the Global Green Growth Institute in South Korea, officially inquiring about how these cities are making progress on their path of combining economic development strategies on the one hand, and then more conventional green strategies on the other. Now, I'm going to present you four key messages, really. But before getting there, let me begin with this chart, and I'll do two things with this chart. I'll explain how these charts work, because I'm going to use them quite a lot. And second, then going to use this as an opener. So, first of all, the survey was basically sort of existing rating of different answer categories along a scale, often from very successful to not successful at all, and we offered many, many different categories. I'm only showing you sort of the most important ones here, which we then first coded along the lines, this axis of how successful cities have been in relation to those, but then also ranked them according to which ones came top and which one came bottom. So if we're looking at this first question here, which was about green progress to date, the areas, the policy objectives where cities have been working on for the last 20, 30 years in some cases. What came first? Green space, recycling, water pollution. This is the low-hanging fruit. This is the stuff that's easy to deliver, whereas at the same time, the biggies, greenhouse gas emissions, energy security, resource consumption, are featured at the bottom. Not a real surprise here. This is where the future challenge lies. So, first message. The policy sectors where city governments can make a difference. And obviously this has a lot to do with the policy remit cities have. The responsibility that is devolved from national governments to city governments that then can make a difference. The first thing to say here, before I'm going to get into sectors, and some of these sectors are important for your products, I'm assuming. But before I get there, the most important opportunity cities have is to facilitate cross-sectoral policy. Through our research, we have quite a lot of evidence that cities are better equipped to do that for multiple reasons than, for example, national governments. It's partially an awareness of the interdependencies of these sectors, why cities are so able to do so. But still, let's look at the traditional sectors and which ones cities have really been working on, and then this question asking how developed are those policy areas with regards to the green agenda. Waste, land use, water comes first, and then easily followed by energy, transport, and buildings. The one outlier here is food. And that's an interesting one, because while, yes, this has never been part of a traditional policy remit of cities, it's creaking up the agenda. So for those of you that are working on food, congratulations. I'm predicting now that for urban governments and for sort of urban living much more broadly, this is going to be an issue which becomes more dominant. Now here, this is the first question which really links the question around economic development on the one hand, and then sort of the green agenda on the other. And what we ask here is, where do cities feel where there's the greatest synergy, the opportunity to combine those sectors? And this is where the big ones, and you need to remember those because they, in the end, are the most important sectors related to that question. Transport, energy, and buildings come first. Having said this, there's an enormous difference how cities are dealing, for example, with the transport sector compared to the energy sector. I'm going to show you that with just 2 slides here, actually 3 in total. The first talks about transport, a traditional urban area where cities for decades have really innovated, not only policy, but they have helped innovating technology. And all of these photos here, they speak for themselves. A lot of these things you will be aware of. Urban transport, transport more generally, is a classic urban policy territory. Yes, there are countries where it's not devolved to the city level, but where it is, you almost certainly can feel the difference. If we're moving to energy, that's very different. What I'm showing you here is the world's largest offshore energy wind farm. It's not far from here. It has the wonderful name London Array and will eventually power electricity for about almost 1 million residents. But besides the name, it has nothing to do with London. Why? Because London doesn't have any control over energy policy, really. What London can do with regards to energy policy is fairly limited. That can be different. Munich. Munich owns its sort of municipal utility company, 100% public, and through that can implement very strategic targets, such as the one to be 100% renewable by 2025. Moving on to the second big point, and this is about cities as first movers. It's become a cliche that we're innovating, scaling in cities, but how does this really feature if we look at the statistics more generally? I think you're cheating on your clock. No, I don't believe that. Anyway, if we look at how cities have been performing in the past, over a 20-year period, uniquely, we can detect a very important pattern, which is the decoupling of resource intensity, carbon emissions, so the environmental negatives on the one hand, and positives like population growth, innovation, but also in some cases, the growth of the economy. Take Copenhagen, it's a wonderful example. One needs to be careful here. There are a lot of boundary problems. We're outsourcing emissions to China, so it's not entirely all that positive. Still, there is an inherent capability of cities to be at the front of this innovation we're talking about. And not surprisingly, a lot of cities refer to themselves not only as innovative, but as highly experimental. When we're looking at the new technologies that are applied in cities, and we inquired here significant lists of different technologies and looking at where is the majority happening, it's once again in transport, energy, and buildings. And here's just an overview of the technologies that were featured first amongst those 90 cities worldwide. Third point, ultimately cities are about social capital and facilitation, and the facilitation of a sort of more collaborative mechanism. And very surprisingly, when we ask about a lot of the policies and where they came about from, public opinion, together with leadership change, featured first. In the production and the rollout of these policies, you also had community groups and the general public coming first. Now, this is not only important in this stage of policy making, it's then also key as part of scaling your innovations. You will need sort of enlightened citizens that are willing with you to test and trial new technologies. And that is happening whether it's the Boris spikes here in London or the green and renewable mobility strategies in Berlin. You always need people who can also potentially deal with failure, and cities are well equipped to cater for that situation. Finally, last point, and it relates back to which of the sectors are unique to sort of the urban governance story. And it's spatial planning, the shaping of cities, the physical, architectural, form-giving exercise that is absolutely central. Not only when we ask about the key policy tools which cities use, do we have a strong hint at the spatial planning exercise, with development planning, standards and regulation, public awareness coming first. But when we ask about the core capacity these governments have, the core capacity public government in cities have, urban planning comes first. And the shaping of cities, whether it's at the metropolitan scale, the scale of here, Paris, London, Berlin, or at the neighborhood scale, is of enormous relevance for enabling not only your technologies, but most importantly, the energy efficiency which characterize the urban advantage to a large degree. If we are on top of that awareness, then are able to deal with existing environments such as London and are able to retrofit with this knowledge about the importance of urban space in the appropriate way, I think we're already getting one step closer to addressing this global and very urgent question. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Alison. Alison Dring is the co-founder of Elegant Embellishments. Really quite an interesting technology. She's changing the morphology of cities, which is really quite forward-thinking. How do you change the dynamics of city by design, making it possible that architecture can interact with the city? So Alison, let's see what you've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Elegant Embellishments, we're actually architects, and we're also design manufacturers, and we develop products that help buildings perform better. And when I'm on an airplane, I'm always attracted by this tiny phenomenon that happens to the side of me at the tiny vent hole in the bottom of the passenger window. And it's there to regulate pressure from the inside and outside. And this vent hole has condensation that eventually crystallizes. And this crystallization happens in a condition, which is the change of altitude. And I'm always fascinated because this crystallization is actually a materialization. And I often think to myself, if we could just scale up this process to the scale of architecture, could this materialization from a condition become a productive process? Air pollution is this kind of condition. It actually determines urban behavior. Air pollution is an amorphous condition that has more impact on daily life than civic planning. And yet the morphologies of cities, the architecture of cities, often make no reference to it. So you have two really dangerous components of air pollution. You have oxides of nitrogen, commonly referred to as NOx, or you have volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. This is titanium dioxide. It's photocatalytic titanium dioxide, and it's a technology that uses light to eliminate NOx and VOCs from the air. It emerged in 2002 as a part of a group of smart materials that were doing molecular work but were aimed at architecture. And the way photocatalysts work is they use photons from UV light to trigger reactions. And in this case, you have NOx and VOCs and other organic compounds being broken down into harmless substances via redox reactions. And the whole process yields calcium nitrate, which is then washed away by rain. So when you start thinking about photocatalysts, you immediately think about surface enlargement. An ornament is a kind of device that's being surface complex, would enhance a photocatalyst. And corals use surface enlargement as a way to survive on the ocean floor for better reception of light. So we set out to design a substrate for this technology that would be ornamental and enable it to be clustered and sited near pollution sources where they were typically becoming in cities on facades. And this kind of technology really benefits from being deployed over the scale of architecture. And we knew in order to get this technology onto a building, it had to be in the form of an aesthetic component. So we invented ProSolve, and this is a facade module that reduces air pollution in cities. It's a lightweight thermoformed plastic. It's coated in photocatalytic titanium dioxide, and it basically does three things. It uses surface enlargement to enhance the technology. It creates turbulence on facades, which breaks down wind speeds, which makes pollutants easier to catch. And its shapes are tuned for better reception of photon bounce. We prototyped it for 5 years, and then in 2012, we put it on a building. So this is a depolluting facade at the Torre de Especialidades at the Hospital Manuel G. Gonzalez in Mexico City. It's a 2,500 square meter screen, but given the surface enlargement, we've actually got about 5,000 square meters of active surface here. According to recent technology trials, the facade in Mexico City is reducing the air pollution of approximately 1,000 cars on the road in Mexico City per day. It's possibly the world's largest urban air purifier. So one of the end results of the reaction with photocatalytic titanium dioxide is calcium nitrate. And calcium nitrate is a salt, or a solid, and it's synthesized from NOx, which is a gas. And this calcium nitrate also makes a great soil fertilizer. And we couldn't help noticing that ProSolve was actually precipitating another material. And this got us thinking about precipitation as a production process. If we could just scale up this process to the scale of architecture, could we get the atmosphere to produce materials? In fact, could we make products out of thin air? And cities are geological. Traditionally, cities are built from the material found in the ground directly beneath them. You have Dubai, which is built with coral stone. You have Mexico City, which is built with aggregates, volcanic aggregates in the concrete. You have Paris, which is built with limestone. Cities in this way are inverted mines. And there's a future geology of cities, which could be that, that they become deposits, that they act as substrates for the precipitation of new materials. It's possible that our resources for building may not be in the ground anymore, but in the atmosphere. We could use the scale of architecture to produce materials from conditions, and we could exploit conditions that are often worsened by human behavior. Global warming is such a condition. Global warming is essentially about carbon flux. We see it as a kind of material transfer. And basically a carbon flux is the migration of carbon from the Earth into the atmosphere via combustion processes. After 200 years of industrialization, basically we've got, from our original 731 billion tons of carbon in the Earth, we've got about 200 billion tons left. And we saw this carbon in the sky suddenly as a resource. And we thought if we could just find a way to reverse this carbon flux, we could actually mine the sky and use this resource for a material. So biochar is a leading process for reducing CO2 in the atmosphere. And basically what it does is it's a burning of biomass, which has absorbed CO2 in its lifetime, into a carbon-stable char. It's a proven method, but the problem with it at the moment is scale. Given the proportions of global warming, what we actually need to see is a drastic increase for the production of biochar. So we looked at human behaviors that sustainability often works against, which are things like growth or spending or consumption, use. And we noticed that the consumer products industry has actually very high turnover, high material waste, and it continuously replenishes demand. And we saw this as an opportunity. If we could just get biochar into this industry as a production material, we might be able to sequester atmospheric CO2 in the form of products, which could then be shredded at the end of their lifetime and put into the ground. So we're proposing a carbon-negative material made with biochar. This is a material prototype. We're currently at 70% biochar, which is, in fact, carbon-negative, but we're going to keep pushing for more. And because global warming is essentially an architectural condition, we're proposing that our material have an architectural vision. And we see that as a building product, we could use the scale of cities to distribute and sequester carbon. And this could be in the form of a material opulent facade panel. It could be inventing a new building block. But what this does is inverts current eco-perceptions about leanness. And in this case, consumerism would be an environmental act, and building would be an environmental act. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our third guest is Connor Rifle. You're not presenting, but you're joining us on stage to do a panel. And if Philipp can come up. But Connor, do you want to just introduce yourself? I'll give a little bit of context. Connor comes from the Carbon Disclosure Project, he's head of cities. And the CDP is really at the heart of what's happening in carbon. Started off in industries, understanding where carbon's being produced in industry, and now that's moving into cities. So,
that's right. Thank you. But just very briefly, CDP started about 13 years ago asking companies to report on their carbon emissions every year. And we asked on behalf of institutional investors. Fast forward 13 years, basically every listed company in the world reports their carbon emissions to CDP every year. And it's a very effective process both for investors getting actionable investment-grade data on companies' carbon emissions and climate change activities, and also for the companies that participate. The CDP request is often the first time that companies go through and start thinking about climate change and measuring their emissions. We've duplicated that process for city governments, and we started that 3 years ago. We now have over 100 of the largest cities in the world reporting to us every year on their updated carbon emissions, their risks from climate change, and other climate change related metrics. So similar to some of the data that you were seeing from Philipp, except updated every year and reported through our online system. So I'm delighted to be here and look forward to your questions.
Okay. I'll seed a question with the audience and then I'll come back to it. If you had £1 billion to spend on city sustainability, whatever your favourite city is, what might you spend it on? What are the big things? And I'll come back after we've had a bit of a chat and find out what your answers are. But first of all, it's been said that a city is a wholly owned subsidiary of its ecosystem. How can technology help connect people to that ecosystem or get them to understand it?
Well, it's a large question. I mean, I think probably the people in this room will have really great answers as well. I mean, the one that comes to my head is Foursquare. I don't know if anybody uses Foursquare in here, but there you go. So Foursquare is basically a check-in technology you can use on your phone to check into various places. And Foursquare's founders started off by wanting to invent an app that helps people make more out of their city. And they ended up inventing this check-in app. Since then, Foursquare's gone on to have some of the most interesting data based on these consumer check-ins at all these different places, and is monetizing that data through selling it to various folks who are interested in trying to understand the city. It's also a way that I understand the city. If I go to a new city, often I'll use Foursquare and see what my friends, Foursquare will give me recommendations based on what my friends in one city might like in another city. So it's a way of kind of trying to understand your space, and I think apps like that and the smartphone revolution are good examples, and I'm sure people have a million other great ones.
Any other comments?
So, I mean, at a very generic level, I think any technology that takes advantage of this very particular urban condition, which is in the end still built around physical proximity and a sort of a degree of physical nearness, both can profit from that characteristic, but can also further enhance that characteristic. And the transport world is full of those examples where just think of possibilities of sharing all sorts of vehicles, not only cars, but bikes, and being able to increase the utilization of a whole range of public goods. I think is one of those areas where, in particular, the latest phase of technological innovation has made an enormous difference.
Okay. Thank you.
I think from an architectural perspective, I have to say that a lot of the technology that we have in terms of applying to building and infrastructure works on an invisible level. And I think it's because a lot of the problems that we're now facing have happened on a kind of microscopic level because of the kind of rate at which we've industrialized. And I see that maybe this problem solution happening on an invisible level isn't so great for users. I think we don't really know what buildings do, and therefore we don't really know what buildings can do. And I think that's one of my pet peeves. Is I'd like to see formal identifications of technology happen. I'd like to see the city start to sort of turn its insides out to start a dialogue. I think it's really important that you understand that there are atmospheres you're walking through that are dangerous to you. As much as any kind of physical thing that you encounter, I think you need to be aware of that. And I think there's a potential in the city to formalize this, and if anything else, just to get, I think, our sensors working as users.
It was interesting when the Bristol example was being talked about. That was kind of revealing the character of the city through its objects. I've recently been working with Thames Water and exploring how we could use things like augmented reality to look at the quality of the river, or what the state of the leakage is in the pipes by revealing that data through technology. So there's some interesting things there. But back to the billion-dollar question, what would people really like to do in their city to make it more sustainable? Any thoughts in the audience?
Lots of thoughts.
If you briefly say who you are, where you're from.
We should get to vote on their idea.
Oh. Yep.
My name's Rod Hackney. If I had that sort of money, I wanted to create a sustainable city, I'd like to think, and I think when Philipp mentioned working with community groups, it started my thinking on human endeavour. If you take the UN Habitat estimation for 2030 of 2 billion city dwellers in the world not living in anything but a slum. Now, London has the same sort of problems. We've got rid of a lot of the old-fashioned slums. But if we're going to spend money, the greatest way of spending it, I believe, sustainably, and I hope Philipp and the other speakers might want to comment on this, is to invest it in those people that are not receiving the benefits of living in a city. They actually don't do anything other than try and find enough food to feed their family and a decent shelter for the night. Some of them are rough sleepers, most are not. Many don't have any access to proper housing. And I'd like to think that if you're going to invest that sort of capital, invest it in the human energy and resource available in our cities.
Okay, thank you very much. Investing in human endeavour. Okay, gentleman in the middle table.
Right. Rohit Talwar from Fast Future. Broadening out the sustainability conversation beyond environmental sustainability, I would be looking at what we can learn from social sustainability initiatives elsewhere that are actually not even low tech but no tech. I'll give you one example. In Mumbai, in the slums, the people in the community have a self-funded insurance scheme where they all put a little bit of cash in. So when they get caught riding on the public transport system without a ticket, they use that money to pay the fines. There's no technology in there. The community just knows who's put money in and who's had a fine. And the one thing the community does do is coaching to the people who get fined a lot about which time of day to ride and how to avoid getting fined. But that's a solution that works because you've got, those people are never going to be in a situation where they're going to have the technology to use mobile phones or anything. And I think we've got to look for those kinds of solutions that are truly scalable beyond big cities like London to where the majority of the world live.
So again, very people-centric around collaboration to be able to make their way in a city very effectively. Okay, gentleman at the front.
David Wood, London Futurist. I'd like to go the opposite direction from Rohit. I'd like to come back to the environmental issues. I was very interested in Alison's discussion of two of the big problems facing cities, namely the pollution on the one hand, And secondly, too much carbon in the atmosphere, which could lead to greater climate change, which will lead in turn to more extreme weather, and whether it's hot or cold. And that could be the biggest threat to many cities. I mean, New York had a big issue with Sandy, and we had this terrible incident in the Philippines recently. So, I mean, I think, and I'd be very interested, if you think, Alison, if your systems for taking these pollutants out of the atmosphere, are these really going to be able to scale up in time? Because if they would, I think it might be worth spending the $1 billion that Ian is offering to accelerate that. Is that feasible?
Just take it.
Well, having said that, the billion is what you will spend anyway. The big thing is your choice over the next few years of what you spend it on. Any thoughts on that?
Thanks. I think the thing is about the biochar proposal at the moment in terms of global warming. It's very much a prototype, and this is a very important process for us as architects. We're out there to experiment and to fail. And I think the importance of doing that is that you do it at a desktop level, you do it at a city level. And we should all be doing that because we're dealing with circumstances that are constantly changing with adaptive systems, and we should allow for permutation to happen in those solutions. That being said, biochar, which has been proven, it's been sort of in effect for 5 to 10 years, the leader of the biochar sort of movement is in the States. His name is Johannes Lehmann, and he's written quite a lot about the potential of using sort of every bit of farmland or every bit of agricultural space we have on the globe, and what's our maximum sort of reduction rates. And I think he's getting around 12% a year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for a process that we're doing anyway, just replacing like for like, it's something. And our interest in it, and I think there's growing interest in this idea, is how to kind of hit that industry and pull out of it using demand, using behaviors we've already got, and not using things that sustainability usually suggests, which is to restrain and to conserve and to keep everything within a system.
The example I thought of when I learned about your work was in Thames Water, they've got a big problem with sludge. This is the polite term. So how can the city build itself out of its own waste? I thought that would be really quite interesting. If you can turn sludge into biochar, that would be starting that journey of sustainability.
And I would add to that. I mean, I think that you know, this is the climate change and the need for cities to reduce their carbon emissions it's the first foreseeable industrial revolution. We know it's happening. Cities are going to reduce their carbon emissions. In fact, cities are the ones that are kind of leading the way in a lot of cases. Chicago, their carbon emissions citywide in 2010 were 33 million tons. They're going to take that down to 6 million tons by 2050. So this is happening. This is going to happen, and it's going to be solutions like Alison's and others that are going to make it happen. So for entrepreneurs, this is the big problem. And it's up to you guys to come up with big solutions to help us get there. And there are a ton of them already out there. So it's going to happen. Are you in or are you out?
Thank you. I think in summary, the challenge we've got ahead to make cities sustainable is to replace the energy, the resources, and the cost that cities are grappling with much better information and much better design. And if we can do that, we might end up with a smart city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.